me free. Baba, Baba, you always were, you always are, you always will be, pure of heart, an angel shining through the dark of night. Take my hand and guide me there, into breath, away from fear. One look into your face and I'm alive. Save me. Set me free. Baba, hey, Baba.
It is all my supreme will. Everything is because I will it to be. Nothing is beyond my knowledge. I am in everything. For me, there is no time and space. It is I who give them their relative existence. I see the past and the future as clearly and vividly as you see the material things about you. Meher Baba, 1932. 45 miles east of Oklahoma City, in the center of America, a small town was founded by Czech immigrants in 1902. The founders named it Prague, after their beloved Czechoslovakian capital, altering the pronunciation to distinguish it as a place of new beginnings. This small Midwestern town occupies a unique chapter in Meher Baba's mission, for it was here that Baba was hospitalized after shedding his blood on American soil in a severe automobile accident. The historic event of the accident, the incidents in Meher Baba's life that led up to and foretold of it, and the 12-day period of recovery in the Prague hospital, is the subject of this documentary. Meher Baba made his first trip to England and America in the fall of 1931, stating, "Love is calling me to the West." Poet Malcolm Schloss beautifully expressed the shared experience of many who met Baba for the first time at Harmon-on-Hudson, New York. Our habits of thought and emotion and action, which we had struggled to eliminate for years, disappeared without effort overnight. We became aware through the circumstances arising in our daily lives of both our greatest strengths and our greatest weaknesses, and in some strange way, we were given the power to use the strengths to overcome the weaknesses. In Meher Baba himself, we witness constantly the manifestation of perfection in every area of life. Here, again incarnate, we began to realize, was a being such as Jesus, such as Krishna, whose very presence overwhelmed the soul with a love beyond our comprehension and grasp. Elizabeth Patterson was another Westerner whose inner life was transformed upon meeting Baba during his 1931 visit. Many years later, she shared the experience. Immediately my feeling was one of recognition. All the way to the far end of the room where he was seated, I tried to recall where I had seen him before. The feeling from him was one of familiarity, like coming across an old friend in a foreign land, a friend whom one has known well since childhood. Since that earlier period, only Baba's appearance has changed. I walked over to where Baba was seated and noticed the sandals on his feet. His feet were crossed in front of him, and the sun was shining on his beautiful hair. His remarkable eyes reminded me of a Persian print, but they were so alive, with 1,000 dancing fires in them, that I realized I had never seen anyone like Baba before. Nowhere in my world travels had I seen his likeness, nor did he seem to fit into any nationality. In his presence, I can only liken it to being seated by a quiet pool at the base of a great mountain, with only the sense of peace in nature, newly born. This feeling has never left me. On January 3, 1932, 2 days after returning from his first trip to the West, Meher Baba met with Mahatma Gandhi at Gandhi's residence in Bombay. Baba and Gandhi had previously met on board the SS Rajputana several months earlier when sailing from Bombay to Marseille, France. Their extensive conversations had a profound impact on Gandhi, the depth of which was confirmed in a newspaper report of Gandhi's disembarkation in Marseille, where he was quoted as saying, "Traveling on board this ship, incognito, is someone of whom I am not worthy of being the dirt in his nails." Upon their return to India, Gandhi wanted to hear about Baba's trip to the West. He was particularly interested in Baba's impressions of America. "Gandhi, what do you think about the West from your experiences and tours?" Baba, "In America, the spiritual hunger is intense. That is why I went and stayed there for a month. There is everything there materially. There is wealth. There are brains. There is heart. In other words, there is sufficient preparedness for spiritual growth and development." Gandhi, "Then there is an awakening and interest about spirituality in America?" Baba, "Yes, there is much. But the Americans have not had sufficient light and genuine guidance by a master in a spiritual direction. If they get these, they will respond wonderfully." True to his word, Meher Baba returned to America in the spring of 1932. On the journey, Baba first revisited his lovers in England. While he was there, several British government officials came to meet him at the Fellowship Club in London. One of them asked, "Why do you wish to make your center in America?" Baba replied, "Because I find there a flood of energy, though it is misdirected at the moment." On May 14th, Baba boarded the SS Bremen at Southampton bound for America, accompanied by his Indian disciples, Chanji, Behram, Dr. Ghani, Adi Jr., Kaka, and Westerners, Quentin Todd, Meredith Starr, and his wife Margaret. This visit was covered extensively by the press, including Time magazine and the New York Times. The Time magazine article, published on May 2nd, more than 2 weeks before Baba's arrival in America, included the passage, "Meher Baba is supposed to have performed many miracles, but now he wishes only to, in his words, make Americans realize the infinite state which I myself enjoy. His method of accomplishing this is cryptic, yet reassuring. Let God flood the soul. What I am, you are. Other publicity included coverage by Movietone, which filmed Baba in Greenwich Village on May 22nd, and Paramount, which filmed Baba at Harmon-on-Hudson on May 23rd.
What is your mission? To make others realize the truth in every phase of life, and to make brotherhood a practical fact. Why have you come especially to America? Because there is greater energy in America than elsewhere, but most of this energy is misdirected. I will divert it into creative and spiritual channels.
It is not practical to overemphasize the material at the cost of the spiritual. It is not practical to have spiritual ideals without putting them into practice, but to realize the ideal in daily life, to give a beautiful and adequate form to the living spirit. Is this your message to America?
On May 22nd, Mr. and Mrs. Graham Phelps Stokes hosted a dinner in Meher Baba's honor at their home in Greenwich Village, with over 300 people attending. One woman, from among several African American guests, asked Baba to help the people of her race, to which he replied, "I will." On May 24th, Elizabeth Patterson and two companions, Princess Nerina Machiavelli and Anita DeCaro, drove from New York City to Harmon-on-Hudson, 33 miles north, to spend the day with Meher Baba. All three women had met Meher Baba in 1931 at Harmon and felt an abiding connection with him. But this day, May 24th, would prove to be pivotal in Elizabeth's spiritual journey with Meher Baba. After lunch, Baba led his lovers outside to the stone terrace, and some went to pick wildflowers in the yard. Elizabeth recalled, "I noticed that Baba remained standing still, so I stayed close by." Baba turned to me and gestured, "Didn't I want to pick the flowers too?" I smiled and said that I would rather remain near him. Baba then stepped forward and motioned for Elizabeth to follow. He bent down and picked up a small pink flower, which he handed to her. Kaka was nearby, ready with the board, and Baba motioned for it. Spelling the words out, he had Chanji read for Elizabeth, "Always keep this flower and write down today's date. Someday you will know the meaning of it." When Elizabeth returned home that night, she pasted the flower inside the cover of her New Testament and wrote, "Baba, May 24th, 1932. Elizabeth recounted. Not until many years after, when I was unpacking a steamer trunk that had been with me on 2 long trips to India, then been put in New York storage, and finally sent to me in Myrtle Beach, did I discover again the New Testament among my effects. Opening the cover, there were the words, Baba, May 24th, 1932. In a flash, another date, May 24th, 1952, came to my mind. The date the accident had occurred in Oklahoma, when I was driving Baba and 3 of his close disciples. It had been a catastrophic occurrence. Yet, despite serious injuries, all eventually recovered. I do not know fully the meaning and deeper significance of the accident, which happened 20 years to the day, May 24th. But I do know that Baba knew then and now. Through the experience of sharing Baba's suffering to a degree, I feel my life, instead of being nearly cut off, was extended for a purpose. The gift of the little flower was grace from the Master to be treasured in the heart. On December 8th, 1936, Nerina and Elizabeth arrived in Bombay on the steamer Elysia for an extended stay with Baba. They were accompanied by Jean and Malcolm Schloss, Rano Gailey, and Rano's mother, Nani. Elizabeth and Nerina stayed with Baba in India and then traveled with him and a group of disciples to Cannes, France, on July 29, 1937. That November, Nerina returned to India with Baba, and Elizabeth followed 4 months later. The women remained with Baba in India until 1941, when he sent them back to America, entrusted with the task of locating and establishing a universal spiritual center for his work. After a 3-year, wide-ranging search, they finally succeeded in acquiring the land for Baba's center in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, through Elizabeth's father. 1944 marked the beginning of the preparation of the property for Meher Baba's promised visit, an undertaking that would require 8 years of intensive labor by a small group of dedicated Western disciples. At the airport in Bombay in 1952, Baba took a seat to sign the exit visa form for his trip to Myrtle Beach. After signing it, Baba immediately stood up and, in a serious tone, dictated on his board, "America wants my blood, and it shall have it." Baba traveled from India with 6 women disciples, Mera, Mani, Meru, Dr. Goher, Kitty, and Rano. 6 of Meher Baba's men disciples followed on a separate flight 2 days later: Adi Kayarani, Dr. Duncan, Gustaji, Meraji, Dr. Nilu, and Sarosh. Of the women who traveled with Baba, Mera was Meher Baba's most cherished disciple. Baba said she was the purest soul in the universe and the only person who loved him as he should be loved. Years earlier, he had revealed that Mera played the role in his advent that Radha played in Krishna's, the role of the divine counterpart, the beloved of the divine beloved, whose love for the avatar is unique in its purity and one-pointedness. Baba's care for Mera's sanctity was such that for 19 years she was secluded from all contact with men. Baba said of Mera, "She is my very breath, without which I cannot live." Baba and the women disciples traveled by train from New York to Florence, South Carolina, then by car, arriving at Meher Spiritual Center on April 21st.
Then we got to Myrtle Beach and Noreen was waiting for us and Elizabeth was driving our car, I think. That's what I think. Then we went to the center and then we were shown our house and they were very enthusiastic. Noreen, Elizabeth, they said, Baba, you must come to see your house, you know. So we all went to Baba's house and then they showed us around and then we got into our own cottage and it was comfortable. But Baba all the time stayed outside, means Baba was not in this nice house, only for the night. And once he left in the morning, then he doesn't go back. And then he's all the time here, you know. And Baba was getting busy to when to give darshan, when and what and how.
In the 1983 number 2 issue of The Awakener, Phyllis Frederick wrote that Baba had foretold in the early 1920s that his work in the West would be accomplished by women and in the East by men. She concluded, and so it proved, for several decades, both in Europe and America. The strongest personalities and the hardest workers have largely been women, especially those he contacted in the 30s. Baba said before he left India for the first time in 1931 that he had to contact all the Western members of his circle before the Second World War. Many of these key women disciples were present for Meher Baba's 1952 visit to Myrtle Beach. In addition to Elizabeth and Nerita, who were hosting Baba, there was Margaret Krask, Dila de Leon, Myrtle Ivy Douce, Agnes Barron, Phyllis Frederick, Adele Walken, as well as Ron O'Galey and Kitty Davy, both of whom had traveled with Baba from India. Hundreds met Meher Baba for the first time during his visit to the center. The experience was deeply moving for many of the newcomers. Baba's sister Mani, who had traveled with him, described it as a melting of hearts. People from New York, California, Chicago, Panama, and Europe came for the opportunity to be with Baba. Many visitors were from Myrtle Beach, including members of the local African American community. Meher Baba rose to stand each time a black person entered the barn, an outward gesture of respect, conveying to each one that they were most welcome and that his love knew no boundaries. Beryl Williams from New York City met Baba at that time, becoming instantly devoted to him. She recalled that first meeting. Delia opened the door for me and said, "Baba, this is Beryl." As I hesitated at the entrance, Baba rose from his chair and stood with outstretched open arms to me. The next thing I knew, I was weeping my heart out on that beloved shoulder at the joy of having found my home at last. Baba left no room for doubt as to where I belonged in his welcome. The Murshida of Sufism Reoriented, Ivy Douce, invited Baba to visit California. Baba agreed, saying he wished to travel by car. He would visit Meher Mount in Ojai, the mountain center established for him, and then travel north to San Francisco, where a number of devoted followers were longing to meet him. On May 20th, after almost a month at the center, Meher Baba and a group of his close ones prepared to depart for California in 2 cars. Elizabeth drove Baba in the first car, accompanied by Mani, Mara, and Meru. The second car, driven by Sarosh, had as passengers Kitty, Delia, Dr. Goher, and Rano. Before the 2 cars exited the center, Baba asked Elizabeth if she had her insurance papers. As she did not, they drove 7 miles south to her home, Yupon Dunes, to retrieve them. The group then left Myrtle Beach, ending the first day of driving in Columbia, South Carolina, at the Forest Court Motel, later replaced by the Forest Court Apartments. The next morning, the party left Columbia, making a sightseeing stop at Caesar's Head State Park in the Blue Ridge Mountains. That night, they lodged at the Moreland Heights Motel in Murphy, North Carolina. Their rooms included a kitchenette, where they prepared a light supper and tea. Baba slept well, and the next morning he was in a good mood. Meher Baba's route from Murphy onward closely followed the Bell's Route Trail of Tears, one of several passages extending all the way to Oklahoma. The epithet Trail of Tears was given to the infamous, fundamentally inhumane relocations of approximately 60,000 American Indians imposed by the United States government between 1830 and 1850. A large sculpture of an American Indian on his horse, beaten down by wind, snow, and hunger, is on exhibit not more than 1 hour's drive from where Baba's accident took place. Entitled The End of the Trail, it honors the suffering endured by the various tribes on their enforced Trail of Tears. The first models for this sculpture were created in 1894, and the final version was installed in the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in 1969. The next day was a very long drive through the mountainous region of Tennessee. Mara remembered, Tennessee was very beautiful. As we drove through the mountains, the drive was pleasant and enjoyable. Baba was in the front seat. Flowers were everywhere. I enjoyed seeing the American countryside. A few hours after leaving Murphy, they arrived at Lake Ocoee in the Cherokee National Forest. Baba said of this place, "I have been all over the world, but I have never seen more beautiful scenery. It has a spiritual atmosphere also." As they drove through the hills of Tennessee, they passed a billboard reading, "Jesus Christ is coming." Mani recalled, "Here was Baba sitting in the car with us, driving past that sign." After a few miles, another sign read, "Jesus is here." For us, it was a secret. We knew he was here. Mara also remembered the incident. It was so lovely to be in the car with Baba and see that sign. Later that afternoon, after lunch at a truck stop, Baba asked Elizabeth to take a small detour to Ruby Falls, an underground waterfall near Chattanooga. Elizabeth replied to Baba that if they kept stopping, they would never get to California. This was to be their last sightseeing diversion. Mara enjoyed the falls, but Mani experienced a chilling intuition. When the lights turned the water red, she recalled, "The red falls seemed like blood. I don't usually have premonitions, so it was surprising." Departing Ruby Falls, the party continued on to Waynesboro, Tennessee, where they stayed at the Sims Motel. The next morning they resumed their trip at 5:30 a.m. and drove until they reached Ozark, Arkansas, and lodged at the Pond Creek Motor Court Cabins. For supper, Baba had only milk and bread remaining in his room. He asked for the same for breakfast. The owner of the property had over 100 hens, which were continuously scratching in the dirt the entire night. Baba went sleepless, complaining of pain in his throat and stomach. The morning of May 24th was misty. They had breakfast at 4:30 a.m. Baba appeared to be preoccupied and uncharacteristically was not in a hurry to be off. Before resuming the drive, he gave Sarosh a stern warning.
On the morning of the accident, whenever Baba's doing special work, his face used to get dark, and he was walking up and down, up and down. And as we got in the car, he said, "You must be at this rendezvous at the right time, otherwise I'll never speak to any of you again."
Goher pleaded with Baba to allow her to ride in his car, feeling the need to be with him. I made a note in my diary that day, the 24th. I miss Baba so much, and it hurts so much. One must learn to bear such pains. Later, I realized I had to be there to look after them. I shouldn't be involved in the accident. That morning, Elizabeth sat in the car for several minutes, waiting for Baba as he paced back and forth. They finally departed, but after just a few hundred feet, Baba had her stop. He got out of the car and gazed at the countryside surrounding Pond Creek. Once back in the car, Baba asked Elizabeth to drive faster and faster. They crossed the Arkansas River into Oklahoma at Fort Smith when Baba told Elizabeth to stop the car again. He got out and again paced up and down the highway for several minutes. During another stop, Baba asked Elizabeth their location and how much farther it was to California. After consulting the map, Elizabeth informed him, "It looks to me that we are about midway across the continent." Meanwhile, Sarosh had been unable to keep up with Baba's car, intermittently losing sight of it, and no wonder, as Baba kept imploring Elizabeth to drive faster. At one point, Elizabeth said, "But Baba, I'm hitting 90. "Go faster," was his response. At 10:15 a.m., 8 miles west of Prague, Oklahoma, Elizabeth and Baba, in the same instant, saw a car coming towards them on the wrong side of the road. Baba pointed to the car just before impact. Elizabeth described the calamity. "Suddenly I saw a car coming at me at a very high speed. It swerved from its right side of the road in front of my car for no reason that I could see. I put on my brakes with all force and gave the other car as much room as possible and kept my car as far to the right-hand side of the road as I could without going into the ditch. My car was hit very badly on the left front by the other car." Baba and Myrtle were thrown out of the car on impact. Elizabeth was unconscious, pinned behind the steering wheel with broken ribs. Myrtle was also rendered briefly unconscious and suffered a broken hand and arm, as well as deep cuts on her face from Elizabeth's shattered eyeglasses. Monty suffered severe whiplash that plagued her for years afterwards, but only minor injuries otherwise. When Myrtle regained consciousness, she saw Baba and Myrtle lying on the ground near the car in the mud.
We were actually a bit late for the rendezvous, and Sarosh was getting terribly uneasy, and then suddenly I heard him say, "Oh my God, what's that?" And I didn't take it in at the start, but on the bank we saw Baba lying and Myrtle and Marnie, and we jumped up. There were a crowd there already, and Baba was quite injured. We didn't know how badly then, and so was Myrtle. And Elizabeth was in the car leaning over the, the steering wheel. So I had a little pillow, and I put that at the back of Baba's head, and that got his blood on it, and that I presented to the centre, because Baba had said that after his blood had to be shed on American soil. And also, it happened right in the heart of America.
The impact of the accident was very great because he was thrown out of the car. You know, and I was also thrown out of the car. We both. The ambulance came and one stretcher was quickly hurried to Baba to help Baba, to lift Baba in the stretcher. And when the stretcher came, Baba said no. He pointed towards me, he said help her first, you know. So Baba in great need, he was in great pain, need of help. Even then Baba thought of another and he told them to help me. And then, so that shows how much Baba's love is real, that in such a time of crisis, even then he thinks of another, not himself. He was in great pain.
And there was a little hospital there run privately by a Dr. Burleson, and it was incredible the way he responded, because he gave up his private sitting room, and he was terribly impressed with Baba. They did everything for us.
I was a physician who cared for Mary Baba when they had their accident. One of the ladies' most severe injury was the skull injury, which would look like a cracked egg that had been dropped about 3 feet from the floor. She got some swelling in the brain, but surprisingly recovered quickly. I think the fracture helped accommodate the swelling necessary.
When the specialist came and he showed the x-rays of Mara and Elizabeth to the specialist said, oh, both these women expired. Dr. Burleson said, no, they're still alive. You know? And he, in other words, the impression I had was that he himself was sort of surprised that he had been able to save them, and didn't take full credit for it either. That was the kind of person that he was.
She was the one who required most of the time and attention to start with. When the ambulance brought the group in, of course, everybody wanted attention right quick. But as we always do, we pick out those that are most critical and attend to those things first. One of the party by the name of Money, we had putting their Baba on only available space left, which was the OB table. Well, he had indicated by his talking on his fingers that he wasn't hurting, and had told me to go ahead and tend to what I was doing. Monty didn't want me to do that. She wanted me to take care of Baba first. Well, I ignored her.
He described how he was working on Mehera and working basically frantically to try to save her life. And Meanwhile, other people started drifting into the room and started saying things to him, and he was trying to ignore them in order to concentrate on Mehra. But there was all this, he kept hearing all this Baba, Baba. You have to go look at Baba. It's gentleman and Baba. And he said, I didn't know what they were talking about. But finally it got so annoying and distracting that he stopped what he was doing and he went to this adjacent room and looked in the door, and he said, and Baba was sitting there, and he said, as soon as I came in the doorway, Baba starts, and he kind of imitated Baba's face, and he says he starts beaming at me and like this, and you know, he says, so I figured he couldn't have been very badly hurt.
Make a long story short, everything turned out well, and everybody got well. And as soon as we got to the point where I thought they could stand the trip, they all made the trip to Myrtle Beach. The wounds all healed well and no complications. Of course, the high point to me, personally, was getting them all well and without any complications. That was, especially the one with the head injury, that was something. I didn't expect her to live. That's the worst fractured skull I've ever seen in my life.
The passengers of the other car were unhurt. The driver, a Korean War veteran who had lost a leg, was driving a new, especially equipped Mercury sedan for the first time. His account of the event was recorded in the accident report. I was going east when I saw a truck in front of me, so I slowed down. Upon doing this, my brake froze on one side, which gave the car the tendency to turn left. In doing so, I made a U-turn across the highway and off the road. Then, the Nash came at a pretty good speed and hit me in the rear. After the accident, Baba called for several of his lovers to come to Prague for additional assistance. These included Margaret Krask, Myrtle Ividus, and her daughter Charmian, as well as the men disciples who had gone on ahead to Mount. When Margaret Krask arrived at the hospital, Baba asked her if it was possible to exercise the muscles on his right side without moving the bone structure. She assured him that she could help, having studied the exact technique necessary to meet Baba's request. Margaret worked on Baba's muscles 3 times a day. As Ivy and Charmian entered Baba's room, he held Ivy's hand and spelled out on the board, "You must understand that this was God's will, and it will result in benefit to the whole world." One of Myrtle duties was to care for Elizabeth. Elizabeth was in great distress due to numerous fractures, 2 broken arms, a broken collarbone, and several broken ribs. The collarbone fracture had come close to severing her jugular vein. Heat lamp treatments necessary for her injured shoulder, compounded by the cast she was wearing, left her uncomfortably hot. To ease Elizabeth's discomfort, Myrtle fed her crushed ice. When Elizabeth first realized that Myrtle was with her, she whispered, "Do you realize how lucky you are to have been sent for? Many people would have loved to be in your place." Myrtle replied, she was certain that was true. Mani was deeply touched by the kindness of the people of Prague, not only the devoted service of the hospital staff and the heartfelt care of the Burleson family, but also the spontaneous kindness and support of the townspeople. Her experience is recorded in Heather Nadell's book, The Joyous Path. I still remember when I would go and come from the motel to the hospital where Baba was. I'd go around this particular row of houses, and one day the children were waiting there with a basket. They'd obviously been waiting for over an hour, because somehow I was later that day coming from the hospital. They were waiting to show me that their doggie had a litter of puppies just that morning, and they wanted me to be the first to see them. They wanted to share that with me. I mean, overwhelming things like that happen. And the parents, too, came out, and they were so happy. They would always ask, "How is the injured party?" Amazing. As I would limp home, I hurt my knee and had a cane. People would stop on the road, perfect strangers, lift their hats in greeting, and asked if they could give me a lift to the hospital or wherever I wanted to go. Children would stop outside their homes just to greet me, or to give a flower for the gentleman at the hospital. The proprietor of the motel would always come with a beautiful bunch of flowers, again, for the gentleman at the hospital. And other people would ask us, "Are you the people who were in the bash?" "Yeah, we're the people in the bash." "Oh," they'd say, "will you give this flower to the folks who were injured?" Another example of the townspeople's kindness was shared by Charmian Knowles in her autobiography, Spread My Love. She recounts that when she went to the local laundromat to wash Baba's and Mera's blood-stained clothes, she had to leave the clothes to soak while she went back to the hospital to feed Meru. When she returned, she found that the women in town had taken the clothes out for me and washed, dried, and folded them most beautifully. It was one of the many times that the people of Little Prague showed us how large their hearts were.
When I was with beloved Baba at his home in Mayorazad in 1967, with only a few Mandali present, I witnessed his suffering so much more, and continuous, apparent and continuous. He said to me then, "As your breath ebbs and flows, but is always with you, so is my suffering always with me." And I think that beloved Baba had the last word in the following incident. At that time, I was close to one of the Mandali at Mayorazad as we watched Baba move slowly and painfully to his chair, and I heard the disciple say softly with a long sigh, "Poor old man." Later that day, as I walked alongside the chair carrying Baba to his room, he said, "Remember, I am God 100%. And he repeated this. So to my understanding, he was saying, you may see my madness and weep for its condition, but remember, I am God absolute. Do not merely descend into sentimentality over my condition, but remember that this suffering is in order that you may be free."
Avatar, Meher Baba Ki Jai, just a phrase we occasionally say until it seeps into our hearts and our souls day by day. And in time, it will flow like the blood in our veins, through the trees with the wind and the rain, until only your praises remain. And so we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai, for every soul who into this world faith may bring. You have fought like a warrior king, and for our sakes have renounced everything. With your blood pouring into the ground where you lay, without uttering a sound on that day. You paid the debt for us we could not pay. And so we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. May your work be successful, we pray. With our glasses raised high in communion, we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. For those driven from their Native American homes, forced to forsake their histories and roam far away from their ancestors' bones. Though they prayed to their Maker for thousands of years, they were condemned to shed thousands of tears while living out all the worst of their fears. For them we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. And for those who arrive on the waterfront docks of old Charleston in chains firmly locked, to be sold on the auctioneer's block. Stripped of all their belongings of family and kin, like beasts of burden, both women and men, searching the world for the hand of a friend. For them we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai. May your work be successful, we pray. With our glasses raised high in communion, we say, Avatar Meher Baba Ki Jai.